Thanks so much, Micah and Kate, and hello. So I feel like I have the best job in the world. I am responsible for training and educating thousands of our next generation of interdisciplinary leaders at one of the largest and most global universities in the US. Last week alone, we actually graduated 12,000 students in the middle of Yankee Stadium. It was a joyous event, a really important moment. And yet, I also grapple every day with helping students, parents, career changers, alumni really make sense of this moment. The vast majority of our students would be captivated by the conversations that are happening here at Imagine. And just as many are also really nervous about what it means for their job search and their future careers. And so when a book like The 5-Year Century comes along that is relevant and practical on this topic, it's a true gift. It gives us the vocabulary, the context, the examples that really cut through those headlines. The insights in the book are relevant to employees, seasoned leaders, students, and faculty, and it's full of tips and advice that we can start to implement today. I actually think the most important sentence, in my estimation, in the book was actually on the last page. Humans were meant for more. A simple statement, but really profound. Humans were meant for more. I found the book to be really optimistic, really inspiring. It centers on leadership and the need for organizations to really be adaptive, to be human-centered and courageous. So let's dive in and welcome Nancy Hauge from Automation Anywhere and Timothy Driscoll from the Boston Children's Hospital to the stage to discuss the book and what AI transformation looks like in action. Thank you. Thanks so much. All right, here we go. All right, Nancy, so we're going to begin with you. So you used the idea of the 5-year century to really describe this moment. Why did you write the book, and why does the book matter so much now?
I think it matters partially because the world is finally catching up, I think, to what most of the folks in this room have known for a long time, right? That AI was going to change the world at a pace that we'd never seen before. And I think the rest of the world has just caught on to that, and so the timing for the meeting, the book felt perfect. Also, 9 years ago, Mihir Shukla asked me a question while he was interviewing me for this job. He said, Nancy, what do you think the role of human resources will be when 40% of the workforce isn't human? And I thought, well, I have to take this job now because I want to answer that question. And so that's, kind of how the book came to be. He was very prescient in terms of 9 years ago asking that question, because it's just today, I think, that the whole rest of the world is caught up with that curiosity. And that's really what inspired the book.
Excellent. And so, Tim, for 9 years, you've been at Boston Children's. What about this moment really resonates for you? What do you see within your organization?
It's really the fundamental opportunity. When I look at how we actually are getting things done, we have providers that are under the crushing burden of documentation. We have not enough providers to meet all of our patient care needs. We have operations that are fundamentally ineffective. So bringing that together with the work that we've been doing on the intelligent automation front has allowed us to enhance our operations. It's not about decreasing headcount, it's about allowing everyone to practice at the top of their license. And I think that as we continue to roll out this work, kind of in the same vein that it's been pointed out in the book, we're really seeing that change happen very, very quickly.
That's a great lead into a big topic in the book, Nancy, is corporate courage. And so can you talk a little bit about what does courage look like today within an organization?
I think courage is transparency, courage, having the courage to treat the adults that work with you like adults, to make certain that you're communicating with them, that you're not treating them like children, that you hide from truths. I think that takes a lot of courage. It also, though, builds and engenders an enormous amount of trust. And I also think that it's not about just the courage you have, but what you encourage in other people in terms of looking at the future. And so it's not just, do you have courage, but are you sharing it? Are you enfranchising it? Are you bringing other people with you? Mm-hmm. So, yes.
So something that we do in the Academy a lot is myth busting. And so I love the myth busting that you do in this book in terms of incremental change, human-only work, hierarchical structure and technology servitude. Which of these myths do you see most often in organizations, and why are they so persistent?
Yeah, I think incremental change is the one that I see most often, that people say, how do we start in a little bite? How do I test it and prove it? They chatted about this a little bit yesterday, I think, in terms of pilot programs. Sometimes a pilot program is just, how do I delay a decision? When you have to, again, have the courage to do it. That concept of incremental change was very, very prevalent in terms of the quality work that we did in the 80s and the 90s around continuous improvement. But it doesn't work when you have technologies that are dislocating reality. They're suddenly giving you height and distance to the future. The incremental change just won't work. But we're very programmed for it for the last 200 years, and that is one of those things we really have to disabuse ourselves of in order to make the change as rapidly as we need to.
And so, Tim, the question that I get often from parents, from students, is what do we say to young people who are starting their careers or deciding what to study? And they feel like the uncertainty with AI is very much clouding their judgment on, do I even go to college? What do I study? What do I do? What are my prospects? If I study something now, isn't it just going to be outdated by the time I graduate? What do we say to that whole body of students and families who are wondering that?
Yeah. This hits close to home because I have a graduating high school senior right now. So we've had this conversation quite a bit. She's not a big fan of AI, but as we've looked at, just with her use case in particular, and then just how I see the world, is that going to college and studying what you're passionate about is really the key. I don't do what I studied in college today. I've been passionate at every point of my career about it.
What did you study in college?
Ethnomusicology.
Of course.
So that's how I ended up here. No, but really, what you get in the college experience is building those critical thinking skills, the ability to then bring that into business context, the ability to have continuous learning, which is really about what this is all about. And so, my 7 chapters of my career, my passions have been different. I expect my daughters to be the same. The world will be different in 5 years. But I think that going down the college route is still the best way to go.
Excellent. I happen to believe that, and thank you. That feels good for me, working in a university. So Tim, you've done a lot of transformation work, and so for organizations that are trying to adapt, what's the first signal that they are still operating with a sort of outdated industrial mindset? I think there's a gap between wanting to change and actually changing. So could you talk a little bit about what are those indicators that you are not making that shift in your mindset to the degree that you ought to?
I see it in our organization all the time where there's too much focus on metrics, and really it should be focused on outcomes. And so when we look at a quarterly planning, it's not about the number of help desk tickets that get closed or the number of X, Y, and Z. It's not the metrics, it's really the outcomes. And so we look at the outcomes as being broader stroke goals that we can achieve. One of the use cases that we have recently that we were deploying is for our OR optimization for scheduling. And that wasn't necessarily going and looking at how do we take the existing process and either compress it or reduce steps. It's really about the transformation of making it such that we can address the location where a surgery is going to take place. And because we're doing this effectively, it's actually cut a lot of our steps that we followed today out and allows us to actually get 650 patients more care a year, which is huge, and then 65,000 more minutes in the operating room. And so that is the kind of transformational stuff where it's not about those core metrics, it's about these broader outcomes.
That's great. Nancy, one of the pieces in the book that I'm excited to take back and try are outcome-based teams, right? We love our task forces and our committees in our kind of context in higher ed, and so that's going to be, I think, really important to kind of think about. Could you talk a bit about, Tim just mentioned it, but what do leaders have to stop measuring, if they really want to succeed in this new kind of 5-year century?
I would like to start by saying I wish people would stop measuring the success of autonomous enterprise by how many people they got rid of, right? I think it's how many people you enable, how many people, how you can use cranial capacity of the human being in a way that we have not for the last 200 years. And so I think there's some metrics out of the industrial age that don't fit when you are truly optimizing human potential. So I think that there's a series of kind of, do I measure each step in the process versus getting the ball in the end zone? And the problem is the way you get the ball in the end zone isn't always that nice linear, I can easily measure it kind of process. Sometimes it is somebody being weird, It's hard to measure the weird, but I love the weird. I love that dislocated thinking. I would say everybody who works for me today is pretty weird because they're willing to lean into it so much. And that just, when you encourage that, you get different kinds of thinking. That's not measurable yet. We don't know how to do that. We have never been able to really understand how we should measure human creativity and capability. We're about to enter that age, which is why it's so thrilling to a behavioralist like me.
Thank you. And so a question for both of you. The book talked a lot about trust and psychological safety, and I had to read the sentences a few times to kind of understand it in terms of AI builds trust. That felt funny to hear. And so I'd love both of you, and Tim, let's start with you. I'd love to hear a story about how AI really helped to build trust, to improve the outcomes, to kind of look at this autonomous enterprise that you've been creating.
The use case would be our clinical documentation route. The fact that we're able to, out of the gate, originally there was a lot of concern that AI was going to misinterpret information or things like that. And for us on the trust building side, with AI being at the root of it, that is our foundation going on 8 years now. So at first, the concerns were that we wouldn't have the right information represented, that it represents a patient safety risk. But because of the muscle memory put behind it and the tens of thousands of notes that have been generated, and knowing that ultimately the provider is the one who's licensed on the line, so they need to make sure that's representative of things, it's actually built this level of trust in AI that I don't think we would have had otherwise. I think that the trust really comes in working with new groups where they see the success, they see the fact that it's repeatable, they see the fact that we have guardrails in place and heuristics and metrics for these things to understand that is where the trust ends up taking place.
That's great. Nancy, the book has so many wonderful examples from customers and from kind of really every industry around trust. I'm wondering if you could kind of pick through some of your favorite examples of how trust has been built through kind of the adoption of tools.
There's a variety. I'm not going to tell them all because I want you to read the book. It's interesting about trust. I believe trust is a currency. Everybody knows how to earn it. And everybody knows how to lose it, but how do you spend it? And the way you spend trust is through acceleration of change. When people trust you, when the organization trusts you, they adopt your ideas much more quickly. When they don't trust you, they ask a bunch of questions. You can see passive kind of resistance, that sort of thing. It all looks like they're nodding their head and come along with you, but there's a lot of clarity that they need, a lot of cycling around that stuff. When your organization trusts you and you say, hey, we have to pivot, let's go left, everyone's like, okay, left. Now what? But okay, left. And that is, I think, what as you get information that comes to people that they're much more secure about. When you're in the G&A functions, finance and HR and IT, we're mostly about risk management and compliance. And so getting us to really be able to trust content and information that we didn't physically put into the computer, right? Because we have been programmed to do for all this time. Well, I'm not sure that's right because I didn't personally put it in. That was, for our functions, that's a leap of faith. That's a big trust. And once you get past it, though, my goodness, can you go fast? So between trusting what the agent is doing and trusting what leadership is telling them means you have supercharged your organization. Now you can go, that's a turbo.
Absolutely. So second to last question, Tim, what's next? You've done and been a part of such large AI transformations. What's some of the opportunities on the horizon at your organization that you're pretty excited about?
I always say that the opportunities are limitless. Some of the things that we're focused on now is really about agentic data exploration. We have a program going on right now where typically when we see parts of the organization, like say our neurosciences group, they look at things through the scheduling lens, the clinical lens, the financial lens. These are all these siloed systems, and people are running analysis and reports, but there's no connective tissue with this data. And so what we're doing now is actually building an agentic process that provides full continuity and crosswalks across all these silos to uncover the insights that we never would have found otherwise. And the interesting part there is that we're finding these opportunities that we've already turned into active programs of $5 million in operational savings that we can achieve this year if we just change some of these processes. And they're not always automations per se, although very frequently automations play a role in them. But when we see these $5 million, $25 million hits on things, and then we can start to show that these insights are actually allowing us to make a more productive organization, that's going to allow us to actually not decrease in headcount. That's going to allow us to increase in headcount with increased revenue and focus on research and additional patient care and doing a lot more than we are now. So I see it as not reducing the size of the organization. It's about a growth opportunity and expanding what it is that we do.
Thank you. That is something that I can tell our students and our parents very concretely. In closing, Nancy, if we could leave leaders with one message from this book, what would you want them to remember a year from now?
A year from now, I want you to remember that it is the next two generations, the millennials and the Zs, that are going to carry you forward the fastest. And as much as we talk about how we reskill youth, the truth is they've already got the skills. We're the ones who have to come up the learning curve. They're native. And if you tap into that energy, you will go very, very fast.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Nancy, for this inspiration and the insights that we can take home and begin to use in our daily life.
Thank all of you.